Okay, Lisa?
All right. Heavenly Father, we just thank you and praise you for this beautiful day. Thank you for your feast. May everybody have a wonderful Shag Sameach, and may you bless them with your presence, Abba, as they're celebrating you and walking in your ways and doing your things. Abba, we just want to give you all praise, all honor, all glory for the greatness that you are. We ask that you open our eyes and open our ears so that we may hear the message that you're bringing to us today. And please bless our brother Eric with the Ruach HaKodesh so that he speaks as you need him to speak to your children. Abba, thank you for this great opportunity to know you on such a deeper level. We appreciate you, we love you, and we bless your name. Amen.
Amen. So we're going to talk about 3 subjects today. The first one is Rael Wan, who's on the call here today, has come out with a new album or putting together an album. And he was trying to capture there's a verse in Zechariah 3. The collection of the whole thought is verses 7 to 10. So we're going to talk about that first. And there's a certain phrase, 7 eyes toward one stone. And then Yahweh goes on to say, behold, I am engraving its adornment or embellishment. 7 eyes on one stone. So anyway, Rael has a photo of that. And so I started thinking about that, and it's like, what the heck does that mean? So we're going to look at that whole thing. The other thing is, just to mention briefly, in fact, I could even start with this, is that some people are in the mode of Sukkot right now, because on the Hillel calendar, which the Jews as a whole regard, this is the week of Sukkot, started a few days ago. So after this Moed, the way that I calculate Leviticus 23 is that Shemini Atzeret is its own consideration. Typically, when somebody says Passover, well, they're also talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So it's a week-long Passover. But Passover is only the evening of the 14th, the night time of the 14th, where you have a meal. And then the whole day of the 15th is the non-work day. That's the day they left Egypt. And then you keep that Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days. Well, kind of as a bookend, you've got just that one slice of the 14th, a piece of the 14th, the evening meal. The lamb gets, you might say, sacrificed or made dinner out of towards the later part of the day. And then you've got a week. So a little piece of one, and then a full week. So as the inverse of that, you've got 7 days of Sukkot, and then there's Shemini Atzeret. So there's 7 and then 1. 1 and then 7, 7 and 1. These opposite bookends is the way I see it. But the people that calculate that Sukkot is the 7th festival, that Shemini Atzeret is not even considered as its own festival. It has a name. That 8th day has a name, but it's just considered the last day of Sukkot, or Sukkot's actually only 7 days, so it's just like this appendage added on. Well, just like Passover is not the 7 days of unleavened bread. Those are 2 separate matters. It's like, well, so what? Well, what's that got to do with the 7 eyes? Anything? I'm going to suggest that it does, at least in my thinking, the 7 eyes on one stone have something very specifically to do with that. Or you could try to figure out what 7 eyes on one stone, or on one stone, or toward one stone, depending on the English translation. But the point is, regardless of Shemini Atzeret and Sukkot, the next festival coming up is Chanukah. spelled usually with a CH, like Chanukah, or Hanukkah with an H, but it's neither. It's actually Hanukkah, which I write with a capital C and lowercase x, just because you look at CX and go, yeah, that's the way you pronounce the het. Hanukkah. It's an ugly sound. You don't want to hear that sound. It's the sound that reminds me of if you walk down the street and you're dragging a shovel on the asphalt. That's the noise it makes, reverberating through the metal pan of the shovel head. I was doing a study years ago, and the word sepulcher, like het, is a fenced area, like a tomb, like a sepulcher, but it says it's also a low, gravelly sound, and it's the sound of putting a shovel into a pile of gravel. And I realized, gosh, there's this correlation between these things. Het is the tomb that Vav man Zion was put into, and the Tet round rock was rolled in front and then pinned, Yod held shut. So that's Hey Vav Zion Het Tet Yod. I can see as those 6 letters just having to do with that concept of the sepulcher, the gravelly het sound. Anyway, so if Hanukkah isn't even a moed, and a couple years ago, I believe when Kurt was on here, he was having a perspective, and I don't know if anybody still has a perspective or they changed their mind, so I can't say this is what they think, but this is what they had expressed a couple of years ago, was that Yahuwah gave us 7 moedim, and that's it. Everything else is adding to. And if you do away with the moedim, you're taking away from what you're not supposed to do with the Torah. So that should be the culture, the custom. That should be our behavior. Disregard Memorial Day, 4th of July, Christmas, Easter, Halloween, Valentine's Day, and forget Purim and Hanukkah. Well, I've heard other people say, well, it says, I think it's maybe the book of John, Gospel of John, that Yeshua was at the Feast of Dedication. What's that got to do with Hanukkah? Hanukkah is the Feast of Dedication. That's what it's called. See, the word Chanak, Het, Nun, Kaf, K, those 3 letters, Chanak, means dedication. And so if you look in the dictionary, it'll say, well, this is the feast that commemorates the dedication of the altar. A feast that commemorates the dedication of the altar. What's that got to do with anything? Well, it might have been Rico Cortez. I'm not sure. There was somebody that was talking about the significance of the altar of sacrifice, that the temple doesn't make the altar of sacrifice holy. It's the altar of sacrifice that makes the temple holy, or kadosh. So that it's not even the Ark of the Covenant, but it's something about the altar. So in history, during the period of time between Malachi and Matthew, 300 years, the Greeks under Antiochus Epiphanes, Greek general, had overrun Jerusalem, and he slaughtered a pig on the altar, thus defiling the whole thing. It's blood getting on all the stones and blah, blah, blah. And so the whole temple was defiled. So the Maccabees basically militarily got the advantage over the Greeks, pushed them out of Jerusalem, and then they had to rebuild the altar and sacrifice according to the Torah instructions, and wait a certain amount of time to, you might say, to cleanse the pollution that had been dumped on it by the invading army And then to say, okay, now this we've got time and space, we've got this sanctuary, this sacred zone, which is now belonging to Yahuwah Zavot once again. And well, they wanted to, I can't remember how the story goes, but the idea was they found a little bit of the olive oil that was supposed to be in the menorah, just enough to get the thing lit. But then they had to press the olives and go through the routine, which took about a week to do. And the miracle that they say happened on Hanukkah is that during that week when they were trying to cleanse the temple, the altar, rebuild the altar, get everything back situated, that little bit of oil persisted for 8 days. It's like, well, that's a miracle. There was only enough oil to last 1 day, but it lasted 8 days. Okay, so let's celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days. That's what basically Hanukkah is about. And that the dedication was like an inauguration. Like if a president gets elected and he's inaugurated, same word, inaugurate, dedicate. It's kind of like if you graduate from high school and you go through a certain ceremony. That's a commencement. It's like, well, wait a minute, that's the end of high school, but when you commence something, that means you start something. Well, it's just a celebration, the end of all your days of youth, going through grammar school, middle schools, junior high, high school, and those are, you might say, mandatory by the culture of the government. But now it's an elective. You determine for yourself where you're going to go. Do you go get a job? Do you go start a family? Do you go to college? Do you join the military? I mean, you could go anywhere, but so this brings you to a point now it commences. What I'm saying is that concept of a ceremonial event to be dedicated, to commence, to inaugurate is basically what the word Chanak means. But that being said, you know, this whole study is about the language. So I'm going to try to give a bit of a bigger insight into Hanukkah. What's Hanukkah got to do with John? Now, it may be that the Gospel of John talks about Yeshua at the Feast of Dedication, but I didn't look that up. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It was just a thought, but perhaps it's in Mark or Luke or something. But my point is, John's name is not John. Sometimes it's Yahuchanan, or it's Yochanan. Well, how do you spell the word John? There's different ways to spell it. But there's the prefix Yod He or Yod He Vav, and then Het Nun, Nun, or Het Nun Vav Nun. Het Nun is the word for grace. Hanukkah is Het Nun Kaf. Kaf as a suffix generally means you or yours. So though it means dedication as a word, as a 3-letter word, Hanukkah, if you just saw those 3 letters out of context and you thought, well, Het Nun Kaf, well, I could read that as your grace. Het Nun is the word for grace, but so is Het Nun Nun. So as just a general principle rule, when you take the second letter, Het Nun, and you duplicate the second letter and make it also the third, so it's Het Nun Nun, or Aleph Bet, Bet, or Hey Lamed, Lamed, Dalet Lamed, Dalet Lamed. Whenever you see that done, it's essentially the same word. And if you find one in the dictionary but not the other, you can just know that it's the same basic word. There might be some aspect of difference, grammatical, syntax, verb, tense, but it's all basically the same word. So to look in the dictionary for the derivative spellings, you could have Het Nun, Yod Nun, Hey, Het Nun, het nun, het vav nun, het nun, vav tav, het nun, vav nun. So you could stick yods and vavs between the nun. And what if you stuck a yod between the het and nun? So you have het, yod, nun, yod. Well, het, yod, nun, find it in Klein's dictionary. It means grace or comeliness. But I was looking at this other word in Psalm 119, and it's spelled het, yod, nun, yod. Well, that would mean my grace. If het, yod, nun means grace or comeliness, or the way you present yourself in some aspect of prettified, beautiful. Comeliness is a little different aspect in English anyway, but the word is, you could say, well, that's mine. But in Psalm 119, that word is translated preserve me. Het, yod, nun, yod is translated preserve me. Although it could be read as my grace. So if you're trying to wrap your mind around how this works, the only way to do it is to be able to look at the individual letters and have some understanding of the individual letter meaning, the effect of every two letters, and then the prefixes and suffixes. Because if I look at het, yod, nun, I could say, wait a minute, het, yod, chai, that's the word for life. Nun is this action, and yod suffix is my own. So het, yod, nun, yod can mean nun, like a lightning bolt, my life. Preserve me. Equip me with life. Okay, that's how they get it. What's that got to do with grace? Het nun with a yod stuck in between. It's like, well, what is grace? So I looked up on the dictionary, or online, just punched in, what's the Christian definition of grace? Boom, just whatever popped up. I don't know whatever website that was from, but it was just right there. The first thing that came up off of Safari. Think about this. Grace is, the Christian definition, the spontaneous, unmerited gift of the divine favor, specifically in the salvation of sinners, and divine influence operating in individuals for their regeneration. So that concept of regeneration is bestowing life. So here, even though the word in Hebrew for grace is het nun, to regenerate and preserve my life, that's het yod. So they're knowing that this het, like a zone, like a pasture of Psalm 23, like the kingdom of heaven, is the kingdom of life. And to impart life is adding the nun, or even putting the nun as a prefix. So what I'm saying is the only way to wrap your mind around why is grace spelled het nun, life het yod, to impart life or preserve life het yod nun. The grace from the Christian mind is that the deity, whoever you want to picture that as, has decided to say, I'm just going to give of myself all that I have. Another definition is that the Greek word chorus, chorus, in another place said it was a Greek word charis, charis. Well, is that the same word? Well, if you look at Greek letters, probably starting with the letter chi, which is the ch or the k sound, and then the r and s, the vowels are those plugged in. The point is, chorus is like the backup singers of a choir, but cherish, charis, is where you get the word charismatic. Well, those are the beyond Pentecostal, I would say, the charismatic movement, and then the hyper charismatic, going up to the heavens and councils of angels and doing all this, let's just call it what they refer to as kingdom age business. their definition from the Greek is gift or favor, a benefit, liberality. Liberals, well, those are compared to the opposite of conservatives. Conservatives want to protect and save and hold, and liberals just want to give it all away. So the idea of giving what away? It's also the state of kindness or favor, undeserved, unearned, freely given. And then another minister had said, grace is the bridge that God built to have relationship with us. So if you think about that, the Christian grace, and they're the only ones that use the word grace. So that's why I'm saying it's kind of in their camp, that God has such abundance of love, of stuff, of favor, that if he held it back as to be merited by behavior, he'd be ended up with all of it and nobody would have anything, because nobody can merit his favor. So he just decided to just open the floodgates and dump it on everybody that he could. All you have to do is say, yeah, I want some of that. Get a truckload. Another person, quoting something from Acts 4:33, said, God has completely and fully extended himself to the people with everything he is, everything he has, and everything he can do. Favor done without expectation of return. Absolutely free expression of the loving kindness of God to men, finding its only motive in the bounty, meaning the bounty, the bountifulness, meaning he has so much that the only reason he's giving it to everybody is just he doesn't want to hoard it. He's an ever flowing stream, a river, ever flowing. Can't hold it back. He's just got to give it away. That's the Christian mind of grace. So the question is, if that's what chorus, remember, there's one person singing like a solo, but then you've got the whole choir backup chorus. It's like, that's the same picture of this grace, that all the angels at the service of ministering this grace, this charismatic, beyond kindness, beyond love, beyond compassion. It's just pouring it out, pouring out the Holy Spirit. But the word het nun nun. So if het nun nun is the word grace in Hebrew, let's just look at the words of definition which are associated with the derivative spellings of het nun. Grace or comeliness, life, het vav yod tav yod. It's like there's not even a nun there, but it's the het vav, het yod is life, het vav yod tav yod, choiti or chawayataya, based on experience. That's kind of like the there's the word for epic, which is well, there's a certain way of it's not the word epic. Oh well. It's that you experience with something with inductive reasoning, or empirical is the word I'm thinking of, deductive reasoning, or just you must experience the thing for yourself, to the empirical comprehension. Het vav kaf chok means to laugh or jest. Het nun, favor, grace, charm. But you see, to laugh, that's just het, and that's your het. So I'm trying to say, how do you get a sense of what this het thing is? Where exists life, grace, laughter, chok. Het kuf is the word for law, command, constitution. Het nun vav nun, a prayer for mercy, And then the response to the prayer, granting amnesty, gracious, lovely, kind. Het nun vav tav chanot, quaint shop, store, or a cell. Het nun, het vav nun, coquetry, to implore or make graceful. Compassion, mercy, clemency, where you get the word clementine. Type of orange, and there's that song, that old song about somebody named Clementine. Het nun is also where you get the word Khan, Khan, which would be a warlord. That if you're in a caravan out in the middle of the desert, you got to have a military guard, because otherwise you'll get raided by bandits in the middle of the night. But if you came up to what's called a caravansary, sometimes they had it underground, caves with guards up on top, but there's provisions. It's like coming to an inn, and the inn wasn't just simply a place with light and heat and food, but there was a military guard, so that there was a lot of wealth carried in a caravan. It had to be protected by quite a few guys. But the fact that there was a warlord, a Khan, who said, you can stay with me. I'll protect you. I'll feed you, give you a comfortable place to stay. Well, is that because he had so much stuff? If you were somebody seeking protection, appealing for mercy, please have mercy on me. Please be gracious to me. Why? Well, look at all that stuff you're sitting on. You got so much stuff. Can I have some of it? Is that what this is? The Khan, the warlord, has done something. Oh, maybe he just inherited it. Maybe he has a whole business, a corporation where they're mining resources out of the ground. Well, he didn't get them from the ground for free. He had his whole crew. He had to run an entrepreneurial adventure of getting equipment and doing it right and making sure people are safe and extracting the ore, the resources, and then turning that into a wealth. And you say, you got so much, let me have some of that. Is that God's grace? Het nun he means to encamp, inclined toward, aimed at, reached, bent down, which is a synonym with ivarekaka, or the word barak, which is to bless, to bend down for someone of a higher, call it esteem or position, to bend down and give something to somebody in a lesser position. It also means to park a car. So a het nun yod hey is a parking place. Hey, I'm saying this because you can stick the letter hey as a prefix and look up the word. You can stick tav or mem or nun or bet or lamed in front of the word as a prefix and try to find the word. So hey, het nun yod hey means parking. Well, what's a parking place got to do with grace? It's the Khan's encampment that you say, hey, can I please stay with you? Well, the Khan might say, yeah, whatever. Just, take your shoes off before you walk in on the carpeting. If you go to the word for Hanak, inauguration, consecration, dedication, but it also means training and education. Het nun yod kaf hey is a surname, like your last name, the name to which you have to become accustomed as an apprentice. Well, then it's not just overwhelming, overflowing amount of resources. You're just going to pick up the stuff that there's so much of. If you have to be taught, trained, and domesticated of the house, then your obligation to the Khan, your obligation to the Chanak, is that you be dedicated to that Khan's, that warlord's way of doing things. So if Yahuwah's Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, if the Het represents his kingdom, his compound, the way I see this pattern working is that when you're outside the fence, I see the verse where Moshe says, I put before you life and death. So the het represents life, even though it's a sepulcher. The Zion is a weapon to be cut off, and it means that represents death. I put before you life and death, and I suggest you choose life. That's pretty simple. When you stand at the door of the kingdom, life or death. Well, he's got all this life. Let me just have some. No, you have to choose life or death. It's got to be a volitional, proactive intention with absolute disclosure. If you choose life, you have to turn your back on death. If you choose death, you're turning your back on life. So those who choose life but want to play with death, let's just say there's a overt graphic association with devils and skulls and dead stuff that's associated with death, not life. But it's the God of life that invented, didn't he? Didn't he invent the skeleton? Am I saying that one's good and one's bad? And it's like, oh, you can't appreciate a Tim Burton movie? Oh, there I go again, bring that up. My point is, there's graphics, there's a reality, there's a concept. What is he presenting us with? Life or death? Choose life. Yeah, but can't I still appreciate that other stuff? Choose life or choose death for yourself. Well, then what? Well, if I stand here at the het, and if I take het tet yod as one concept, the next concept is kaf lamed, which I suggest is the Torah. And if I associate het tet yod with Pesach, Passover, Yahuwah said, keep this Passover meal because I am taking you out of the land of Egypt. The word Mitzrayim is Egypt, which means oppression. Zadi Resh is rock, like being between a rock and a hard place, and you're squished between two stones, no room to move. And I'm going to be your Elohim, and you're going to be my people. So he is taking ownership. So if I walked into a grocery store, if I looked at the het as a grocery store, and if I looked at the tet as a basket or a bag that I put my stuff in, as soon as I pay for it, it becomes mine. So the yod is the hand that holds that is like my personal possession. If yod is a suffix at the end of a word, it means it's mine. So I can say, well, when does something become mine? When I pay for it, or if I made it myself, it's mine. The word kuf nun hey literally means to own something because you either bought it or you paid for it. Kana, translated, owner, thus possessor of, maker, thus possessor of heaven and earth. Kana shemayim vayeret. But the point is, Yahuwah did something to declare his ownership of his people, which is all het, tet, and yod. And if that's Passover, and if the very next thing, kaf lamed, these two letters, if that lines up with unleavened bread, okay, well, so what? Matzot, matzah, mem zadi aleph, mem zadi hey, matzah. Zadi aleph is the word to exodus, to egress, to publish, to go out. Mem zadi aleph, the time or the place of going out from, mem as a prefix can mean from, they left Egypt. So that's matzah, the time of matzah. For him to say, eat unleavened bread for a week, he's saying, take this week, the 7 days, to think about the fact I took you out. Okay, but mem zadi, drop the aleph or the hey suffix and put in vav tav, which is a plural, you get matzot. Well, that's a plural of matzahs, eat matzahs for a week. But zadi vav is command. So matzot, mem zadi vav tav, not only is the plural of the word matzah, but it also means commands, which sometimes is translated precepts or ordinances. a demanded command. Do this. Well, I'll think about it. Do it now. You know, the word vav has to do with manning the crew. And if you're on a boat or if you're on a construction crew trying to accomplish something and the order is do this, and you go, well, I don't feel like it right now, there's going to be big trouble. Either you're going to get physically, let's call it corporal punishment for the occasion, or fired, or people are going to get injured. A command is a serious thing. So the play on words with the unleavened bread is that for a week, the word matzah also means find out how to do something, how to do anything. Find out how to eat unleavened bread for a week. Find out what it means to get the leaven out of your house. What is leaven? Is leavening baking soda? Is it yeast? Is it eggs? Egg whites can cause something to rise. What is it? To find out, to seek. Matzah can also mean to seek, to find. Seek to find what? Well, if you just chose life, the very next matter is find out what the commands are. How do you do what he said? How is it done here? Take your shoes off when you step in the door. Why? Because he's got some nice rugs, or he just doesn't want whatever that was you stepped in out in the yard that you didn't see. You don't even know it's on your feet and you're going to track it in. Take your shoes off. We don't even know the offense that we've been wrapped up in when we step in, because all we knew is that he said, choose life. I chose life, and then I step in and go, why? Find out how this operates. Find out what this kingdom is about, and take off your contact with the dead. What? Outside the gates of Jerusalem, outside the city wall, is where Yeshua was crucified. Outside is where the event of the red heifer sacrifice was conducted. And it says it's to decontaminate those who have been in contact with the dead. So you could say they took a red heifer, they killed it, they ground it down to a powder, burned it, took the ashes, mixed it with some water, and what, you dab it on the person? You put an X on their forehead and now they're cleaned? Are you supposed to bathe in it? Was it ceremonial? Was it just an esoteric ritual gesture? But somehow taking the ashes of the red heifer and putting it on someone who had they worked in a hospital, they worked in a morgue, they had been clearing a battlefield, they've been in contact with the dead, and somehow they weren't allowed into the Mishkan, into the city, into the what? Technically, as far as I know, nobody went into the Mishkan unless you were a Levite, a priest, somebody that was officiating. It wasn't like an open church. It wasn't like the local park in the neighborhood. It wasn't, Mishkan means watering hole. Is where we get the word for tavern, taverno, tabernacle. But the local population didn't come in and hang out and have a picnic lunch in the corner of the Mishkan field area, as far as I know. Again, we have these ideas, we have these pictures, we have modern culture that we blend and amalgamate, and then we have, what did they really do? I don't know what they really did, but if you think about it, it's like, well, the priests were in there doing stuff. It wasn't shooting pool and having a beer, even though that's what you do at a tavern, Tavern, which is where you get Taber, tabernacle, tavern, because the B and the V are the same letter with the two consonantal values. The point is for you to come in and learn what's done in here. That's lamed. Teach, learn, repeat, or learn and then teach and repeat. And that whole idea of being trained and educated, well, what's kaf got to do with lamed? Well, kaf is a hand, an open hand. If whatever's in your hand that you give to somebody, you're giving them grace. Het Nun is grace. Nun is the living stuff, the letter that looks like a spring, like a lightning bolt jumping, a little sprout. It's got life. So if Het Nun, grace, is the life inside the Het, well, if there's words of life in this Torah, Kaf might be, I'm giving you the Torah, the instructions of the Torah, so that you'll get its benefit of life. Because after the Kaf, the Lamed, then there's the letter Mem, then there's the letter Nun. So if I just look at Het and then Nun, these other letters are in between. Het, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem. What does all that mean? So I could contemplate if Het Nun, the word grace, and then Kaf, Chanak, means training. The letter Kaf as a suffix just means that's yours. But I could grab the Kaf and say, an open hand, the fingers are in parallel lines. If I turn my hand this way, I can see, well, there's lines of script. So I can see this pattern. If I think of lines like palm leaves, anything with lines is a Kaf sort of picture. But as I contemplate this concept of hand, protecting, giving, that's the stuff of Het Nun. That I'm asking, I'm imploring mercy and kindness and favor and the giving me of protection as well as food and shelter. But if the requirement is for me to learn, be trained and educated, see, that's a synonym with the word Aleph Mem Nun. Amen. So be it. Yeah, but amen is also the word for faithfulness. Not just believing, which is faith, but being faithful to what you were required to do. Taught, trained, tested, to be found not only in compliance, to be skilled to where you're trustworthy. So if somebody says, go do this job for me, and I know you will do it correctly, because I've seen you, I've tested you, and I've seen your performance, and I know I can count on you. And if I go check up on you afterwards and you've messed it up, we're going to have to figure out why, because being messed up is not tolerable. So either you just made a mistake, something happened, or maybe you slipped through the cracks, and I really don't think that you ought to be considered trustworthy yet until you become more skilled, more practiced. So you set the apprentices in first to learn. The journeymen travel around journeying in different groups, different companies, so that they learn different perspectives. And then the master, the maestro, the artisan is the one with his own hands, with his own ability to think and make something, and that it has integrity. That's just within the trades. What's Chanak then? Is it the dedication of the altar? If the Kaf and Lamed represent the altar of incense, or the altar of sacrifice, altar of incense is in here at Pei, then the altar is not just, oh, there it is, the altar. It makes the temple holy. It's like, no, the altar means we have decided to learn Yahuwah's Torah and regard it with the accuracy and the integrity of all we can wrap our minds around and become his faithful, trustworthy servants. Obed, Obedim. Obed means worship and servant and worker, worshiper. So what we find out how to do when you walk in the door from saying, I'm choosing life, now I'm saying, oh, what's going on? It's like you learn, obey him is the worship of him. Obey him. Well, that's a little different than saying, oh no, outside the fence, Jesus was nailed to the cross. The Torah was nailed to the cross. The wages of sin is also nailed to the cross, which is death. And so there ain't no law. We don't have to do anything, he said. We can do anything we want. Well, that's not true. At least in my reckoning, that's not true. And the simple matter of grace is that either God has so much stuff he just can't hold it back, he just has to pour it out, so he changed all the rules. Just talking to a friend the other day, a couple different people who told me, two different conversations. He changed the rules. He changed the protocol. He changed the way it's done. He's just pouring out his grace. We just have to stand and thank you, receiving it. But you see, that's not the word chet noon or chet noon, as far as I can see in the Hebrew. So Hanukkah is not just the Maccabees dedicated the altar, but Hanukkah is I am dedicated to Yahuwah, thankful for the life he has promised me, so I will learn as a trained, then skilled apprentice, and then artisan to be his worshipful servant and do what he said. Zadivav, mitzvot. Yeah, but if I'm going to grumble with a rotten attitude, disgusted, disturbed, a little bit of, I really don't care. Memnoon is mana, count, but it's also take it to heart and affect my attitude. There's more we can elaborate about all that. But the idea that, what did he say? Learn it. Kaf Lamed, the altar. Choose to be dedicated to the kingdom of life. It's my dedication to the principles of life of the Torah. So I just said that coming up here pretty quick, we're going to talk about Psalm 119. Just a brief mention of Psalm 119. If you write up the concepts briefly as a summarization of what David was writing about, and here I'll just go through some of these just real quick. So keep this in mind. If the truth was that the Torah, the law, was nailed to the cross and done away with, so we get all of God's abundance, his bounty, unmerited, nothing we can do, all for free, all just gratuitous overflow. If that's the concept of grace, and I've heard people say that if we try to do something, if we're profaning his grace. If we say, well, I'll work for it. No, you can't work for it. It's a free gift. Listen to what David said about the Torah. If the Torah was nailed to the cross and done away with, then we can't ever quote Psalms 119, because David himself, the heart of David would be a pollutant to that concept. But this is some of the things David said, starting with verse 1. Walk in the Torah, guard the testimonies, walk in his ways, keep diligently, keep statutes, gaze at your commandments, study ordinances, keep chok, which is the law, seek, the bet section, observe your word, do not stray from commandments, stored your word in my heart, teach me statutes, my mouth sephers ordinances of your mouth. Rejoice the way of your testimonies. I speak of precepts. Look at your paths. I am occupied with your chok. Make it my focus of attention. Life is that I keep your word. So to choose life is to regard the lines of instruction, the lines of writing, word, and lamed, learn, teach, repeat, rehearse. If you look through the Psalms, especially this one, Psalm 119, you'll find the word to listen, to hear is Shema, to keep, to guard is Shemer, do is ayin, shin, hey, and those words are used repeatedly. Those are the three main action verbs. And then there's a certain small list of half a dozen words, which are chok, mitzvot, mishpat, Torah, and ayin dalets, testimonies. And everything he's writing about is about that stuff. It's saturated through the entire psalm. How can that stuff be done away with? Oh, because God changed the rules. No, I know that's what we've been told, but did he? That's the big question. Have we been told the truth? Gimel section. Life is that I keep your word. Help, give me so I can perceive wonders from your Torah. That word wonder is nephalot, like the word paleo. Don't hide your commands. I yearn for your ordinances. I can't stay away from your commandments. I guard your testimonies. I discuss, that's talk about with others, your statutes, and your testimonies are my preoccupation. The Dalet section. You said you would revive me. That's that word, chet yod nun yod. Teach me statutes. Let me understand so that I may discuss paleo. What he says. You said you'd sustain me, endow me with Torah. Faithfulness is according to your ordinances. That's amen, is that we do what you told us to do, which is the Zadivav commands. Cling to testimonies. Run the way of your command. The Hay section, teach me statutes. Understanding to cherish Torah. The path of commands I desire. My heart is all about your testimonies. Your way is life. My fear of you. Your ordinances are good. I yearn for your precepts. The Vav section. Your salvation and kindness come to me. I trust in your word. Utmost truth is your ordinances. I safeguard your Torah. I have sought your precepts. I speak of your testimonies. I'm preoccupied with your commandments, and I discuss your statutes. Well, that's all this stuff that we're talking about. It's all focusing on what did he say, what did he mean, and how do we do it? It's the Torah. It's his instructions written to us. So they're not done away with. The Zion section, you give me hope. You give me comfort. You preserve me. I don't swerve from the Torah. I remember, so therefore I'm comforted. Perspective, there's big trouble for those who forsake the Torah. Your statutes are music to me. I remember your name and keep your Torah. I guard your precepts. Now, the interesting thing about this word precept here is that it's spelled pei kuf dalet. Fakad. I remembered, I guard your pei kuf dalet. That's not a command. That's not a law. It's not a mem zadi vav. It's not a het kuf. It's not a Torah instruction. Pei kuf dalet. That's the concept that what goes around comes around. A man's way is returned upon his own head. Whatever you do is coming back on you. Whatever you sow, you're going to reap. Blessed are the merciful, they will receive mercy. That's pei kuf dalet. You will be fakaded with your own behavior that you have done to others. How can he guard that? I guard your precepts. See, I would have thought, well, precepts, that's like law, command, it's ordinances, statutes. What's this word precept? So here's an example of what the translators have done. They took the one huge, big, basic precept law of the universe, which is a man's way will be returned upon his own head. That's the precept. I guard your precepts. But they're not telling you what the precept is. But the concept of pei kuf dalet is the prevailing precept of the universe. That's the way he built this place. So if we do the Torah, we get life, comfort, hope, rescue. And if we don't do the Torah, we get enemies, illness, nature fails, our minds go berserk. That's the precept in operation. But it just says, I guard your precepts. But if you don't look at the Hebrew, you have no idea what he's talking about or what the precept is or how that works. So here's the point, and then we'll talk about that when we get into the Psalm 119 thing. If the precepts are, what is grace? Well, yeah, he's got a lot of stuff to give, but does he give it to the faithful, or does he just pour it out to everybody? Who are the faithful? Taught, trained, and domesticated. The word domesticated is bet yod tav, which is also house, or to be of the house. Just another a derivative here. If you put a mem in front of het nun is grace, you get the word brainy, thinking. Mem het nun aleph vav tav, thinking about the letters of the alphabet, is the word for camping. 5 minutes. Camping? Why does the word for brainy have anything to do with camping? Because the mem het nun. Mem het is the word for fat. Your brain is mostly made up of fat cells. So a brainy person is nooning the mem hetness of his brain. Mem het nun. But mem het nun aleph vav tav, the mem is the prefix, the place or the time of het nun, encampment, like at the Khan's campground. Mem het nun kaf is an educator. The place of your encampment, the place, mem, kaf suffix you, camp, het nun, educator, trained, practiced, educated. That's because het nun kaf is Chanuk, like Hanukkah, the time of Hanukkah. Oh, mem, the time or the place of het nun kaf. See, I'm trying to show you 3 or 4 different ways to see this word. But they'll tell you in the dictionary that it means trained, practiced, and educated, which is a synonym with Abraham believed, and it was attributed to him as righteousness. He was found to be a skilled, trained, educated artisan of his task. So what do you do at the encampment? Do you just say, hey, I'm just grabbing all the stuff I can because this guy has so much to give? Or are you saying to the guy, what's the rules around here? What do you want me to do? Mem het nun hey, encampment, but it's also army and host. But see, being army and host, that's a synonym with zavot, zadi bet aleph vav tav. Lamed het nun means tune, melody, sing, chant, compose music, to make psalms. Lamed het nun. Lamed het nun hey is a concubine or a wench? What? The hey is the feminine suffix. What's that got to do with making music? Well, who's supposed to play the music? Comes to mind in Japanese culture, the geisha girls, they play music. So in other words, if it says concubine, well, that's one that's owned by a certain barmaid, wench. I mean, how does this work? What's it describing? Well, if somebody is supposed to be playing music or supposed to be entertaining the troops at the bar, at the tavern, or supposed to be making a pleasant environment for the Khan in his encampment, the band, the musicians up on stage, not like we have at you might say, American concerts of the 20th century, but there was a whole different thing. The musicians used to be almost like on the side, just kind of like having what they call it, elevator music going on, just to create an atmosphere. And maybe it's that kind of a thing. Related words. Tav het nun, another prefix letter in front, prayer for favor. It's also station, or the place emplaced. Station. Ta or noon, tav het noon is an analyst, psychologist, somebody who analyzes. Noon het noon vav is the word nachnu, like the word aleph noon het noon vav, which is the word we, W-E, which means to be part of a group, in the camp, of the same heart. So this idea of the het is being the encampment, or the, like aleph het, ach is the word brother. Mem het is brain. Nun het, the word for Noah, Noach is comfort. The way to really get what the het is about is to take all these other words. And if you know what the nun suffix is, you know what a mem suffix is, you know what the kaf means, you pull all these in, and you have to sit and contemplate for yourself the effect of the common letter, the letter het, in all these different derivatives, and how it's affected by the prefix letters in the nun letters. And as you contemplate that, notice what stays the same, like the concept of the lowest common denominator in a whole list of fractions. That's the het in this case. We're almost at the end of a break here, but let me say this. Put a bet in front of it. Watchtower, examined, tested. Bet het nun, bachan. It also means to probe, assayer, auditor, differentiate, and distinguish. See, the grace isn't just pick up the scraps like a gleaner gleaning. You got to learn what's going on, be able to tell the difference in what's going on. What's the difference between a kaf and a lamed, an ayin and an aleph? Distinguish, to know, and to give a regard that these are the ways of the kingdom. And if you're going to be aleph mem nun, if you're going to be a trusted, faithful one, you got to be able to teach his stuff responsibly and accurately, and you'll be tested, probed. Bet het vav nun, a yardstick, a criterion, a bearing of measure. So for me to ask people the question, hey, did the creator of the universe give humans consciousness? I would say Adam, but kind of strange talk for people. Did he give them some bearing, some tape measure, some plumb line, something to reckon truth with? How do you know what's true? And I've heard people say truth is whatever you want it to be, or there is nothing true. That guy said so. That makes it true. Can you trust him? He's wearing a robe. He's wearing a funny hat. Of course you can. This guy has a big, long list of letters after his name, authorized by a university. Well, this guy's got a lot of money backing him up. I've seen his face many times on the political scene, or the standing up on stage singing music. I got to believe him. No, that's not what you believe. For David to say, your word is truth. For the epistle of John 1 or John, 1 John chapter 3, I think it is, he says, if it's Torah, it's truth. If somebody breaks the Torah, that's a sin. Anything contrary to the Torah is a sin. Well, then if you nail the Torah to the cross and say it's been done away with, that's a sin if it hasn't been done away with. And if you teach and perpetuate that kaf writing lines of instruction that you lamed, if you kaf lamed that there is no Torah to regard, That's pure sin. And to revel in the sin unrepentantly makes you satanic of the kingdom of death, not life. And that's right in the gate. The altar of incense was right in the gate. If you choose life and say there's no Torah, you're out. And so I talked about back in the eriktology class how this tet is like this shield, which is the modern letter tet. You can almost see it like somebody holding a shield with a weapon. So there's a guard placed inside. And then there's this, excuse me, a parable where he says there's a fellow, a wealthy man who gave a feast. Everybody is supposed to wear a certain attire, whether it was a certain shirt, a certain bow tie, a certain type of hat, something, zitiot, whatever it might have been. And there was a guy that got in and wasn't wearing it. And the guy walks up and says, "Friend, well, why don't you have this?" Well, I just came in to get what was here. A lot of food and stuff in here. Great party. What makes you think you can walk in? Why don't you dress? Well, the law was done away with down to the cross outside the door, I believe. And then so the wealthy man calls for the couple bouncers and he says, "Grab this guy, bind him hand and foot, and pitch him out into the street." What? Would your God do that? That's pretty mean and nasty. I mean, I thought it was all grace. Well, if you got to figure out what is grace, and you got to think, how do I be a good son? How do I be a good servant? But how do I be a good son? How do I do what he wants me to do? Well, if I look at the spelling of words and say, well, the word son is bet noon, ben. Ab, aleph bet, is not only the word for father, but it's have a passionate desire. And aleph prefix means I will, and noon suffix is to be engaged in the action. So I can look at the word spelled aleph bet noon, which is simply the word stone, like a rock, and say that I can read it in this other way, saying, I will, proactive with my own intention, aleph, be a good son, ben, engaged in the behavior of, I'm going to find out what of. I'm going to find out what he wants me to do, and I'm going to do that. Well, that's aleph bet noon then. That's son. And I can see at the baptism of Yahusha that the voice said, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." And he said, "Follow me. I only do the things I see my father doing, say the things I hear him saying. Copy me, be like me. I'll show you the way this is done." Well, David was a man after his own heart, and he said, "This is my beloved son." My beloved is the word Dodi, otherwise pronounced David. So when he said, "This is my beloved son," he said, this is my David. Listen to him. And if I listen to David, David loved the Torah. He asked for more of a heart for the Torah. He asked, I need to understand your statutes, your ordinances, your precepts, your commands, your way. Cause me to walk in your way. Open my eyes. Affect my heart. I want to be about your stuff, O Yahuwah Elohi. That's the attitude. So for him to engrave 7 eyeballs on one stone, what does that mean? I'm going to take a break here and we'll talk about that. Part 2. I'm going to hit stop record here.